HR problem, something for companies to fix, a calibration issue, a training gap. But here is the thing, Gen Z has looked at this system, understood exactly what it is, and started walking away from it entirely. Not angrily, not with a manifesto. Just quietly, methodically, like someone who realizes the game is rigged and decides to play a different game, and that decision is going to reshape how an entire generation builds wealth. So the question is, are they right? We're going to explain how the performance review machine works, why it was never really designed to measure your performance, and why a generation that figured this out in their mid-20s is getting weird fast. The central metaphor I want you to hold on to for this entire video is a slot machine, not because performance reviews are about luck exactly, but because the structure is the same. You put in something, effort, results, a year of your work, you pull the lever and something comes out the other end. And you assume there is a mechanical connection between what you put in and what comes out, but there is not. The machine was built by the casino. The casino has interests, and those interests are not always aligned with yours. Keep that slot machine in your head because I am going to come back to it over and over, and by the end of this video, it is going to mean something different than it does right now. Let's start at the beginning. The annual performance review, as most companies use it today, is essentially a relic. It was formalized in the 1940s. The US military needed a system to rank and sort enormous numbers of officers and enlisted personnel for deployment. You need to move fast, you need a number, you need a way to distribute people across assignments, so they built a rating system. That system got adopted by corporations after the war because those same officers became executives, and they brought their management frameworks with them. By the 1960s and 70s, the annual review was a fixture in nearly every major American company. It became ritual, it became infrastructure, and for about 40 years, nobody really questioned it because in a labor market where you stayed at one company your entire career, retired with a pension and a gold watch, the review was one of the few formal levers you had to negotiate your trajectory. Here is what the system quietly assumed. It assumed the manager has a reasonably accurate picture of your full year's performance. It assumed the manager can separate their personal feelings from their professional assessment. It assumed the rating scale is applied consistently across employees. It assumed the outcome, the raise or promotion, tracks the rating. And it assumed that if you do good work, the machine produces a good number, which produces a good reward. 5 assumptions, and here is how they each break. First assumption, the manager has an accurate picture. They do not. Recency bias occurs when the manager bases the evaluation on the last few weeks or months rather than the entire evaluation period. So your first 10 months of the year are essentially noise. What happened in November and December is the actual evaluation, which means the system is not measuring your annual performance, it is measuring your recent performance and calling it annual. These are completely different things. Second assumption, the manager can separate feelings from assessment. They cannot. In a study of 5,000 managers, researchers found that 62% of the variance in performance ratings comes from the rater's own tendencies, while only 21% reflects the actual employee's performance. Read that again, 62% is the manager, 21% is you, so you are not the primary variable in your own performance review, your manager is. That is structurally insane. You could put in a perfect year, hit every metric, and still get a mediocre rating because your manager skews harsh, or because they just had a difficult quarter themselves, or because they subconsciously give higher scores to people who remind them of themselves. That last one is called similarity bias. Similarity bias means favoring employees who share backgrounds, interests, or characteristics with the reviewer. It is real, it is documented, and nobody on your team is going to admit it is happening. Third assumption, the scale is applied consistently. It is not. Some managers are lenient, some are harsh. Some give everyone a free to avoid conflict. That specific one even has a name. It is called central tendency bias, and it means a manager essentially refuses to differentiate. Everyone gets the same middle rating, which tells you nothing about actual performance differences, and effectively punishes your high performers while protecting your low performers. So two people doing identical work, same role, same company, in different departments with different managers can receive completely different ratings with zero connection to any difference in actual output. Less than 30% of employees believe their managers give fair evaluations, and they're not wrong. Fourth assumption, the raise tracks the rating, sometimes, within a narrow band, often predetermined by the company's compensation budget, not by your rating. So the raise pool might be 3% of total payroll. It gets sliced. The difference between a 3.4 and a 4.1 might be 1%. That is $400 on a $40,000 salary before tax. Your entire year of performance differentiation is worth $400. The slot machine gave you a $20 prize on a year's worth of quarters. Fifth assumption, good work produces good numbers, produces good rewards. We just established this chain breaks at multiple points, so no. A study by Deloitte found that 61% of managers and 72% of employees don't completely trust their organization's performance management systems. 72% of employees. That is not a dissatisfied minority, that is the super majority. The majority of people inside the machine know the machine is broken, and they are still pulling the lever every year because what else are you supposed to do? You need the job, you need the raise, you play the game, or you stop playing. And this is where Gen Z enters the picture and where the story gets genuinely interesting. Gen Z has the highest attrition rate of any generation. 22% have already left a job, nearly double that of millennials. And the average tenure? Gen Z's average job stint is 1.1 years. About 68% still strive to perform effectively in their current roles. So this is not disengagement, it is not laziness, it is a deliberate calculation about returns on investment. They are doing the work. They are just refusing to pretend the review system accurately captures that work, or that staying for the review cycle is the optimal path to financial outcomes. Nearly one third of Gen Z respondents say they plan to switch jobs in the next 6 months, up from 25% the year before. Think about what that means structurally. If a third of your youngest employees are actively planning to leave within 6 months and they are leaving before the annual review even happens, then the annual review is completely irrelevant to their financial decision making. You cannot incentivize someone with a process they are not planning to be present for. Now, here is the thing most corporate commentators get wrong about this statistic. They frame it as a problem with Gen Z, entitlement, short attention spans, lack of loyalty. The data instead points to a deeper systemic issue of a growing disconnect between what young professionals need to succeed and what many employers still refuse to provide. This is not a character flaw being expressed as job hopping. This is a rational response to a system that does not pay what it promises. Pay what it promises. Let me show you the math. Imagine you are 23 years old. You take a job paying $55,000 a year. The company's performance raise pool is 3.5% of payroll. If you do well, you get a 4% raise. That's $2,200 annualized, pre tax. Meanwhile, the job market in your field has seen salaries for your skill set increase by 12 to 15% in the past 2 years due to demand shifts and AI tool adoption. So by staying, you are capturing a $2,200 raise. By leaving, you are capturing a salary increase of $6,000 to $8,000 minimum, often more. The slot machine at this casino pays $2,200. The casino across the street is handing out cash at the door. Now tell me, with a straight face, that Gen Z leaving for the other casino is irrational. Go ahead, I'll wait. 51% of Gen Z said they would find a new job if they weren't given a raise in the following year. That is not a threat, that is arithmetic. They have done the compound math on staying versus moving, and the results are not ambiguous. Here is a short story, not mine, a pattern I have observed repeated in enough variations that it is essentially a template. There is a 24-year-old. Let's call him Marcus. Marcus joins a mid-sized marketing agency out of college. He is good. He restructures their entire client reporting process. He cuts the time the team spends on monthly reports by about 30%, frees up roughly 15 hours per week across the department, and gets 2 new clients to renew contracts that were on the fence worth about $90,000 in retained revenue to the agency. He thinks reasonably that this is a strong year. He walks into his review expecting something north of a 4 out of 5. He gets a 3.2. His manager, who is generally decent but overloaded and operates almost entirely on recency bias, mostly remembers that Marcus missed a deadline in October because he was carrying 3 projects simultaneously while 2 colleagues were out sick. The manager also subconsciously gives higher scores to the 2 people who sit near him in the open plan office and eat lunch with him on Thursdays. One of those people, let's call her Claire, generates less measurable output than Marcus, but she communicates upward very effectively, which the manager registers as productivity. Claire gets a 4.0. Marcus receives a 3% raise. Claire receives a 4.8% raise. The difference is $96 a month before taxes. Marcus has officially learned the following lesson. Measurable output does not determine your outcome in this machine. Proximity and social positioning determine your outcome. The slot machine does not reward what you put in, it rewards how you stand next to the machine. Now, Marcus has 2 choices. He can reverse engineer the social game and play it, or he can decide that this is not the game he wants to get good at and leave. He leaves, he moves to a competitor. He negotiates a $68,000 salary, a $13,000 increase. He never has to prove himself for a performance review at that company because he is a new hire, immediately valued at the market rate for his demonstrated skills and not filtered through anyone's recency bias. He essentially jumped the machine entirely. 12 months later, he does it again. Within 3 years, he is at $92,000 in base salary, not because he played the review game well, because he used the job market as his actual performance review system. The market, unlike his manager, is reasonably good at pricing demonstrated skills. Not perfect, but better. Much better. This is the core insight that I think most people miss when they talk about Gen Z job hopping. It is not that they have shorter attention spans, it is that they have correctly identified that the external labor market is a less biased evaluator than the internal review process, and they are using that market as their primary compensation mechanism instead of waiting for the slot machine to be generous. If you are finding this useful, subscribe. I put out videos that explain how systems actually work rather than how they pretend to work. I am not trying to motivate you. I am trying to give you accurate information, which is rarer. Now let's get to the part where things get darker, because the job hopping math is real and it works to a point. But there is a second order effect that most people who are celebrating Gen Z's corporate exodus are not thinking through, and it is going to produce two very different outcomes for two very different groups of people within this same generation. Here is the problem with using the external job market as your review system. It works while you are in demand. It works while your skills are scarce. It works in a market where companies are competing for you. The moment that market shifts, and markets always shift, the strategy collapses. And if you have spent 4 years optimizing for salary negotiation and not for skill depth or equity accumulation, you are now exposed. Let me explain what I mean by equity accumulation, because this is the part that most financial commentary around Gen Z completely skips over. There are two piles of wealth. Pile one, wage income, money you earn by trading time for dollars. You work, you get paid, you spend, you save a little. The pile grows slowly because it is capped by how many hours you have and what the market will pay for each hour. Pile two, asset income, money that grows without you directly trading more hours for it. Equity in a company, investment positions, ownership stakes, real estate cash flow, royalties, licensing, anything that generates returns on the asset itself, not on your continued labor. Virtually all serious wealth, meaning generational, life changing, optionality creating wealth.
Sell what your kids don't need and earn some extra money back. Quick snap.
Wealth lives in pile two. Here is the ugly truth about salary optimization through job hopping. It is pile one. It is wage income optimization. Going from $55,000 to $92,000 in 3 years is genuinely impressive. It is much faster than the performance review path. I already showed you the math. But at $92,000 in salary with no meaningful asset accumulation, you are not wealthy. You are higher earning. Those are different things. You are still dependent on the next employer. You are still one market downturn or one industry disruption from starting over. The people who are getting this right in Gen Z are not just the ones walking away from performance reviews. They are the ones walking away from performance reviews and simultaneously building pile two. And that combination, that is where things get interesting. Over 2/3 of Gen Z report earning income from digital side hustles in 2025. About 83.3% of Gen Zs either have a side hustle or know someone who does, making it a near universal trend. Now, most of those side hustles are still pile one: freelancing, gig work, content creation with no ownership structure. You stop making content, the income stops. You stop freelancing, the income stops. That is still a wage. Just a more flexible wage with better incentives than a performance review. But some of it is not. Some of it is the beginning of pile two, a digital product that sells while you sleep. A small content operation that generates ad revenue and brand deals with scale, not with additional hours. A micro SaaS business charging $29 a month to 200 subscribers. That is $5,800 a month. That is not a side income, that is an asset. The creator economy is now a $250 billion plus industry, projected to hit $480 billion by 2027. But here is what that number hides. About 4% of creators earn over $100,000 annually. The median side hustler makes about $400 a month. The average is skewed upward by the outliers. Most people who leave performance reviews to build digital income streams are trading a predictable bad outcome for an unpredictable average outcome, which might still be a rational trade depending on your skills and your specific situation, but it is not automatically a path to wealth. It is a path to a different kind of grind with better branding. This is what I mean when I say this generation is splitting into two groups. There are the ones who correctly diagnose the review machine is broken, walk away from it, and then rebuild a life that is structurally similar but just operating in a different context. Freelance clients instead of a boss, platform algorithms instead of a manager, still trading time for money, still dependent on external validation. The machine has a different interface, but the underlying architecture is the same. And there are the ones who walk away from the review machine, rebuild their income on more flexible rails, and simultaneously, methodically, relentlessly build pile 2. Ownership, equity, assets that compound. The second group is going to look exactly the same as the first group at 24. They both have higher income than their peers who stayed on the corporate track. They both travel more. They both have more autonomy. But at 32, at 38, at 45, the gap between them is not marginal, it is generational. Let me give you the actual numbers on this so it is not abstract. Toe people, both 23, both walk away from corporate performance reviews. Person A optimizes for current income, gets to $90,000 a year in salary within 3 years, spends most of it, saves maybe $12,000 a year, invests passively in an index fund. Person B does the same thing but also builds a small digital asset, let's say a newsletter business. Spends 2 years growing it slowly. By year 4, it is producing $2,000 a month in direct revenue with minimal ongoing time cost. They reinvest that into broader index positions and eventually 2 more small digital assets. By year 8, person A has about $96,000 in savings and investments, growing at a reasonable market rate. Person B has the same savings base plus free income generating assets collectively producing $6,000 to $8,000 a month, and some of those assets have enterprise value of their own. If person B sells one of them, it likely commands a multiple of annual revenue, so say 3 times annual revenue on a modest asset doing $24,000 a year. That is a $72,000 liquidation event on top of everything else. The difference is not effort. The effort levels are roughly comparable. The difference is structure. Person A has a job, person B has a portfolio. The performance review machine is irrelevant to both of them, but person B has built something that cannot be taken away by a manager's recency bias or a company's budget freeze. That distinction matters enormously. Now, here is the reversal I want to hit hard, because most conversations about Gen Z and work get this exactly backwards. You think the problem is that Gen Z does not want to be evaluated. That is not the problem. The problem is that the evaluation system does not measure what it claims to measure, and Gen Z is the first generation with enough ambient information access to see that clearly and act on it quickly. Think about what changed. Boomers and Gen X accepted the review machine largely because they had no comparative data. You did not know what your colleagues made. You did not know the market rate for your exact skill set in real time. You did not have access to forums where 100,000 people in your industry talked openly about salaries, promotion timelines, and manager behaviors. You were operating in an information desert, so the review
Donna just discovered that on Vinted, she can easily earn extra cash. All she has to do is list and sell what she doesn't.
outcome, however biased, was the best signal available to you about your value. It was imperfect, but it was the only data point, so you trusted it. Gen Z has access to Glassdoor, LinkedIn salary data, Reddit compensation threads, Discord communities organized by job function and seniority level, TikTok salary transparency content, and direct messaging with peers at competitor companies. They know exactly what they are worth on the open market at virtually all times, which means when the performance review machine produces a number, they have a reference point for whether that number is accurate, and most of the time it is not. It is lower than the market, constrained by the company's raise pool, filtered through a biased rater, and justified by a process that their own managers do not trust. Only 1% of Gen Z workers prioritize transparency and honesty in their workplace. That is not a preference. In a system context, that is a demand for the information environment they already live in to be mirrored by the institutions they work for. And when those institutions fall short of that standard, which almost all of them do, the rational response is exit. According to research, only 6% of Gen Z workers say their primary career goal is reaching a leadership position. Think about how strange that looks from a traditional HR perspective. For every generation before Gen Z, the management track was the goal. You got into a company, you worked toward a title, you aimed for the manager role, the director role, eventually maybe VP if you played it right. The performance review was the mechanism that governed your access to those rungs. Every 3 out of 5 you got was a delay. Every 4.2 was a step. The whole architecture of the corporate career was scaffolded around the review system because the review system controlled access to the ladder. But if only 6% of Gen Z wants to climb the ladder, then the entire review architecture is governing access to something most of this generation has already decided they do not want. The slot machine is sitting there, and the majority of the room is not interested in the prize it dispenses. Gen Z is avoiding a specific type of role that promises influence but delivers bureaucracy, offers modest pay increases but demands significant lifestyle sacrifices, and provides a leadership title while stripping away the actual work they find meaningful. That is not idealism. That is a cost benefit analysis. The management track in most organizations asks you to give up the work you are good at, gives you administrative overhead in exchange, pays you somewhat more, and subjects you to a more intense version of the same broken review system now applied to you and the people below you simultaneously. The return on that trade is marginal at best. Gen Z looked at the senior engineers who never went into management and saw people with more autonomy, more interesting work, and often comparable or better total compensation when you include equity. They looked at the managers and saw people with calendar anxiety, political exposure, and modest pay premiums. They did the math. They picked the engineer. Now, here is where the second comedic cutaway would go, and I want you to imagine this as a very dry, very brief scene. Picture an HR director in 2023 presenting at a leadership summit. Slide on the screen reads, "How to engage your Gen Z workforce." She clicks to the next slide. It says Pizza Fridays. A 23-year-old in the back row is on his phone building a Shopify store. He is up to $800 a month. He does not look up. Back to the main thread, and let me talk about incentives because the performance review machine does not just fail to measure what it claims to measure. There is something more structurally important going on. The review machine is not broken. It is working exactly as designed. It is just designed to serve goals that are different from the ones it advertises. Here is what the performance review actually does for a company. It creates a documented record that protects the company legally in termination and demotion scenarios. It provides a ritualized moment of feedback that substitutes for actual ongoing management, allowing companies to underfund continuous development. It distributes a predetermined raise pool in a way that feels individualized and merit based, even when it is mostly determined by budget constraints and managerial subjectivity. And it creates a psychological contract with employees. If you are patient, if you prove yourself consistently, if you stay loyal to the cycle, you will eventually be rewarded. That contract keeps people in place. That is its primary retention function. None of these goals are your goals as an employee. Your goals are accurate feedback, fair compensation, and career advancement. The machine provides approximate proxies for all three, but proxies degrade over time, especially when the people inside the system start measuring those proxies against external benchmarks, which is exactly what is happening. A career consulting firm noted that a huge percentage of their clients come to them right after a bad performance review. Not because they got fired, because the review was the first time anyone told them where they actually stood. That's a failure of the system, not the employee. The review was the first time anyone told them where they stood. This is the machine running on its minimal viable function. Withhold feedback for 11 months, deliver a summary at the end of the year, and call it performance management. That is not management, that is reporting. And it is usually reported with the accuracy of a document written from memory 9 days before Christmas. Let me add a second comedic cutaway here because I think we need it. Manager to employee review meeting December 15th. So, looking at the year, I think overall you did a solid job. I do want to flag that in Q1 there were some communication gaps. Employee intern employee internally, Q1 was 8 months ago. I solved that in Q2. I have done nothing but communicate perfectly since March. Also, you were on 2 different vacations during Q1. Out loud. Thank you. I appreciate the feedback. They both know. Nobody says anything. Here is the truly interesting part of this story, the part that I think has the most long-term implications for wealth building specifically. The generation leaving performance reviews is entering a labor and economic landscape that was not fully available to any generation before them, and some specific structural features of that landscape interact with their particular psychology in ways that create genuine, unprecedented wealth building opportunities, but also genuine, unprecedented traps. Let me give you the 4 traps because this is where a lot of the Gen Z is doing great narrative becomes incomplete. Trap 1, income diversity without asset formation. You have multiple income streams, freelance work, a side project, maybe some affiliate revenue, a small content channel. You feel financially free because you are not dependent on one employer, but none of these streams are building toward anything that compounds without you. You are actually more dependent on your own continued labor than you were at the corporate job, because at the corporate job at least you had a 401k with employer match accumulating in the background. If you replace that with fragmented gig income and forget the investment layer, you have traded stability for flexibility without actually trading dependence for ownership. That is a lateral move dressed up as progress. Trap 2, optimization for current income at the expense of skill depth. Job hopping for salary bumps works because you are demonstrating existing skills to new markets, but skills erode in value over time, sometimes very fast, especially in tech adjacent fields where AI is compressing the value of certain capabilities. If you spend 4 years moving between companies and not deepening any particular capability or building any proprietary system, you are running in place against a floor that is slowly rising. The people who will be expensive and in demand at 35 are not the people who moved around the most between 22 and 28. They are the people who moved around with intentionality, building towards something specific. Direction matters as much as velocity. Trap free, platform dependence as a proxy for ownership. Building an audience on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, or any platform is not the same as owning a business. The platform owns the distribution, you own the brand and the content loosely, but the platform can change the algorithm, restrict monetization, ban your account, or simply lose relevance. The creator economy has three layers: the people who own the platforms, the people who own media businesses that use platforms as a distribution channel but have independent revenue and audience relationships, and the people who are entirely platform dependent and call themselves creators. Wealth lives in layer 1 and layer 2. Most Gen Z creator income is in layer 3. The distinction is not about follower count, it is about whether the revenue continues if the platform disappears. Trap 4, mistaking flexibility for leverage. Leverage in the economic sense means your output can exceed your input. You create something once and it pays you many times. You own equity in something that appreciates without requiring your hours. You build a system that operates without your presence. Flexibility, working when you want, choosing your projects, not having a boss is genuinely valuable, but it is not leverage. A freelancer with 10 clients has more flexibility than a salaried employee. But if the freelancer bills $100 an hour and can only work 40 hours a week, their income is capped at roughly $200,000 a year before expenses and taxes, and that cap requires their constant active presence. That is not leverage. That is a high earning job with no HR department. Leverage would be building a service business, hiring people to deliver the work, and collecting the margin. That is structurally different. Same industry, very different outcome. I am not saying these traps are unique to Gen Z. They are not. People have been falling into all four of them for decades. I am saying that Gen Z is entering this trap landscape at a scale and speed that makes the consequences more acute, because they are leaving formal employment structures in massive numbers without necessarily building the ownership structures to replace them with something better. Now, let me give you the counter argument because I think it is partially valid. You might be thinking, okay, but the corporate track also produces most of those traps. Decades of loyalty to a company that can lay you off, limited equity if you are not in the executive tier, a pension that may or may not exist, and a 401k that might fund a decade of retirement if you are lucky. You are right. The corporate track is not a reliable path to serious wealth either. For most people, it is a path to relative stability and a comfortable middle class existence, which is genuinely valuable but is not what we are talking about when we talk about building wealth that creates options. The performance review machine was never really the engine of wealth creation, it was the engine of income predictability. Two different things. What I am arguing is not that Gen Z should go back to corporate and embrace the review cycle. I am arguing that the instinct to walk away from the review machine is correct, and the question is what you build in its place. And the answer to that question determines whether the walk away becomes the beginning of something genuinely powerful or just a more aesthetically appealing version of the same trap. Here is the framework I keep coming back to when I think about this. I call it the three clocks. Clock one is the immediate income clock. This ticks based on what you are earning right now this month. Most people optimize almost entirely for this clock. Get a raise, negotiate a higher freelance rate, add another client. Reasonable, necessary, but not sufficient. Clock 2 is the skill accumulation clock. This ticks based on what capabilities you are building over time. Skills that will be valuable in 3 years, not just now. Skills that are difficult to replicate and therefore maintain pricing power over time. This clock matters enormously, and most young people either ignore it or manage it by accident. The ones who manage it deliberately, who choose positions and projects based partly on what they are learning, not just what they are earning, have a compounding advantage that does not show up in income comparisons until much later. Clock 3 is the asset clock. This ticks based on what you own: equity, investments, systems that produce income without requiring your hours. This clock is the one that produces wealthy outcomes rather than high income outcomes, and it is the most ignored, particularly by people in the first 5 years of their financial lives, because it is slow. It does not feel like anything is happening. You put money into an index fund and the number goes up or down, and nothing feels different in your daily life. You build a small digital asset and it makes $80 a month, and it feels almost pointless. But the compounding nature of clock 3 means that starting it early and keeping it going quietly in the background, even at small scale, matters enormously at the back end of the timeline. Nearly a quarter of Gen Z and millennial employees plan to quit their jobs within the next 12 months to pursue entrepreneurship. I think about what percentage of those people have a working clock 3 when they make that jump. My guess, based on everything I have observed, is not many. Most are jumping from the corporate salary to the freelance salary. Both of those are clock 1 decisions. The clock 3 is either not running or barely running. And the entrepreneurship dream mostly stays a dream because the economics of independent freelance work, once you factor in taxes, benefits, overhead, and business development time, rarely exceed the equivalent corporate salary by enough to justify the instability. Unless you build something that scales, something with leverage, something that eventually ticks clock 3 at a meaningful rate. The people I find genuinely interesting, the ones who I think are making decisions that will look brilliant at 35, are the ones doing all three simultaneously. They have a job or a freelance situation that funds clock 1 reasonably well. They are deliberately accumulating high value skills through clock 2, not just cruising on existing capabilities. And they are building clock 3 quietly in the margins, maybe with $100 a month into an index fund, maybe with a small digital product, maybe with equity in an early stage company in exchange for contribution, maybe just with a business they are running part time that is not yet interesting but will be in 2 years. They are not waiting for a performance review to tell them if they are on track. They have their own dashboards, their own metrics, their own feedback loops that update more frequently, more honestly, and more relevantly than any manager can provide at an annual cadence. This is the real reason performance reviews are losing relevance for this generation. Not because Gen Z is impatient or entitled, because they have access to better information systems. The job market is a real time feedback system. The platform analytics are a real time feedback system. The revenue number on a small business is a real time feedback system. Compared to those, a once a year rating produced by a biased rater using a broken methodology is not a useful signal. It is noise dressed as signal. And the generation that grew up on real time data naturally prefers real time data. The companies that are going to retain the people they actually want to keep from this generation are not the ones that improve their review forms. Companies are replacing once a year employee performance reviews with continuous feedback models that help managers address issues earlier, improve retention, and boost productivity. That is the right direction. But it is still mostly about retention rather than about restructuring the fundamental incentive alignment, which is the actual problem. The fundamental problem is this: a company and an employee have different interests that can be aligned for a period of time, but the alignment degrades. The company wants low turnover, consistent output, and institutional knowledge retention. The employee wants maximum compensation, skill development, and career optionality. These interests overlap in a zone. Outside that zone, they diverge. The performance review system exists primarily to manage the zone and slow the divergence. It does this imperfectly, and Gen Z, with better information than any previous generation, is detecting the divergence faster and exiting the zone earlier. More than half of Gen Z respondents cited the pursuit of higher income as a primary motivator for leaving corporate work, compared to 49% of millennials. 46% of Gen Z reported seeking more purpose or autonomy. Purpose or autonomy, surpassing both Gen X and millennials. The income motivation is rational, and I have already explained why.